Welcome to SASA, the Save Ancient Studies Alliance Book Club with live author Q&A. Today we'll be talking about Alba by Nichelle Kovacheff, and I'm your host for today, Julie Levy. The Save Ancient Studies Alliance, our mission is to reverse the current downward trend in public study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. You can find us on basically every platform we can get to, so on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. So please join us at Save Ancient Studies or the Save Ancient Studies Alliance, anywhere you can find us on the internet. Our SASA Live event protocol: please be kind and respectful, listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. Please be patient with the technology and those administering it. SASA Live events are live streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and they are recorded and archived. Recordings will be posted on those platforms after the event. And please don't forget to have fun. This is for you. We do want to let you know that we have a virtual conference that is in the works this summer, the Opening the Ancient World virtual conference. You can submit an abstract. The deadline is March 31st. The abstract must be in English, but we are open to papers in any language. Go to saveancientstudies.org/virtual conference to learn more and submit an abstract. Recordings of Opening the Ancient World 2021 and 2022 are on SASA YouTube and Twitch channels if you want to go see what that's like. We invite you to become a recurring donor. If you enjoy SASA's live events like Archeo Gaming Book Clubs, and reading groups, please consider becoming a supporter of SASA with a recurring monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us save ancient studies. Go to saveancientstudies.org/donate to learn more. Thank you for joining us. Here we are with Nichelle Kovacheff. So Nichelle lives in Canada. She studied English and history in university and is an alumna of the Curtis Brown writing course. Alba is her first novel. Nichelle, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm from Canada, as you said, but I'm currently living in Spain right now for a couple of months. I'm working from here. I work for a company that teaches people how to speak English, and on the weekends I travel here and there. Kind of like on the tail end of COVID, I took up curling, so I've been doing that recently, back when I was in Canada, I really enjoyed that, kind of miss it. I'm in 2 book clubs, one that goes over the course of the year and the other one just in the summer, and I really enjoy those. My favorite meal of the day is brunch. I love Eggs Benedict. I love theater and musicals. I saw Hamilton recently in New York. I thought it was fabulous. And yeah, I love to read. I love to write, like lots of different genres, but especially ancient studies. And this is my book, Alba. Yes.
So Alba is set, in the Roman Empire. What drew you to write about that time period? Certainly not the curling.
Yeah, so I've always been fascinated by the Greeks and the Romans. There's so much history. There's so many interesting characters. And about 10 years ago, my friend said to me, she's like, Nichelle, I'm watching this show, Spartacus. I think you'd really enjoy it. So I watched a couple of seasons of it, and I did. I loved it. And I was really drawn to the rebel characters, the nobles that were in the show, like the Romans. I found them to be a bit over the top, but the rebels I loved, and I couldn't get them out of my head. I just kept thinking about them. And so the only way for me to get them out was to write them out. And so that's where I think the seed was kind of planted for the writing. And then I also loved how you have all these really big events in history. Like you have Julius Caesar, Marcus Crassus, Pompey, Spartacus, all living at the same time. And they all in and of themselves are really interesting people. And then they're all together. And so I wanted to write about a little bit about like Julius Caesar and Marcus and Pompey. Like Pompey's not in the book, but he's kind of off page. And then because when they're on their own, they're all kind of like vying for political power and there's different dynamics going on. But then later on, they form the triumvirate. And through that, with all three of them together, they can like push their political agenda. So I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of look at the men who kind of started that and like the behind the scenes. And then another thing I really enjoyed writing this far back in time was that when you write a book that is set around, like it's so far back, a lot of the people, the historians that have talked about it, there's like a lot of speculation and they're trying to guess like there's this artifact and they had these records and maybe it was this and maybe it was that. So I felt like that kind of afforded me some creative freedom too, where I could like write my own personalities into the characters. And like there's certain framework which you have to follow because it's like these events definitely happened, but then there's other parts where you can kind of like fill in what you think and fill in different characters. So I loved that. And then also I've always been fascinated by Spartacus, and so I was thinking like how did he become the way he became? What type of background did he come from? And as I said, there's parts of his life that are really well documented, some that aren't, like that are somewhat documented, and some that aren't at all. Like, for example, when you read up on him, the other rebel leaders like Crixus and Omnimaeus and Gannicus, there's all like a death symbol for them. Like they know when they died, and it's like in a certain battle. Whereas with Spartacus, they don't know when he died, where he died, and so it just says MIA. And so I was like, well, that's kind of cool. So when I started writing, I didn't know if he was going to die, if he was going to live, how that was going to look. And so as the novel kind of unfolds, I was like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to play out. So I really enjoyed having that and that kind of freedom. So yeah, that's what drew me into writing about the Roman Empire. I would say just the big characters, the big events, and Spartacus.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about the Spartacus revolt in particular, but it sounds like that's really a part of how you got into this writing as a whole. So, instead, let me ask you this: like, where did you find your inspiration for characterizing the
Yeah,
big men of the book, Spartacus
yeah.
and Julius and these folks that we know existed and we know so many tidbits about?
Yeah, well, so for Spartacus, I think it was like we don't really know much about his early years. It's not until he gets to the gladiator training school, the House of Batiatus, and it's like we don't even know exactly how he got there. They think maybe he was part of the Roman army and then defected, and then he was sent there as punishment, or maybe he did something bad while he was in the army and then he was sent there. And so when he's in the gladiator training school, he decides with a bunch of other slaves that are there that they're going to try and break out of it. And so they go from having 70 men or 70 people, I think men and women, who break out of it. And then over the course of 2 years, they amass 120,000 people. And so I think that Spartacus himself, he must have been very like charismatic, a great leader, great orator, in order to get all these people rallied together fighting this cause. And I think also he must have had a great mind, a creative mind, a strategic mind, to bring all these people together. To like when you have people of all these different backgrounds and nationalities and trying to organize them. And like, for example, with his creativity, I love in the history where it's shortly after he breaks out of the gladiator school and the Romans are trying to corner them. And so the gladiators are on the top of the mountain and they think, oh, well, there's only one way down, like we'll starve them out. But then they take the vines off the side of the mountain and they braid them together and they rappel down the side and then come at the Romans from the back and defeat them. And like even when they were breaking out of the school, they used kitchen utensils as weapons. And so I thought that was pretty ingenious. And so like to create the character, I wanted to explore him and like his upbringing and kind of look at how he amass the people around him. And also like as the rebel leaders come together, they all have kind of their own ideas. Like they support Spartacus in certain ways, they help him in certain ways, but then they also challenge him in certain ways. And so I was really excited to write about that and the different dynamics. And then with Julius Caesar, I just loved writing him. It was funny, actually, when I first started writing him, he wasn't going to be like that big of a character. I was just kind of going to have him there. But then the more I wrote him, like the more he kind of stuck around, and then he comes back at the end. And I just, yeah, I thought he was fascinating. And then also, like in terms of character development and stuff, one of the things is like you have the rebels. When Alba comes to join them, a lot of them don't get along with her because she represents like everything that they hate, the Romans. And so I loved writing different relationships, like between her and Hadrian, for example. There's a lot of animosity at the beginning, but he likes her because she's like Spartacus's lover, and so they start to form this lovely relationship. And so yeah, I just loved exploring the different characters and writing about them, and kind of as time went on, creating their different character arcs and things.
So the character of Alba is ahistorical. That's an insert. So where did she come from in your mind?
Yeah, so the reason I decided to write the story from her point of view is because with her, I could write the Roman side and the rebel side and get like in behind the scenes. And like, even though she's with both of them at different points, she's never like part of them, but really she's never like really part of them, but she sees what goes on. And I loved being able to explore that through her eyes. And also like, so when she's with the nobles, you have the hierarchy of when she's at her villa and like at the temples and stuff. And you have like Julius Caesar, who, so he has been banished from Rome and he's just come back, and now he's like trying to work his way back into the politics there and what's going on. And you have Alba like trying to navigate her aunt, who's like a bit of a psycho, and like trying to find her daughter a husband, and the different like scheming that she has to go through and at the coming of age party. And then you have like Cneius Crassus, who's Marcus's son, and Marcus is like the wealthiest man in Rome. And like Cneius thinks that, oh, the slaves are just there to serve us and feed us and entertain us. And so I knew that with Alba, I could see like that part of the Roman side and the different hierarchy and all those dynamics and the politics and things going on there. And then once she joins the rebels, then there's like the different backgrounds and nationalities and things, people that she gets engrossed with there. And so I loved writing about all that. And also in the book, so there's two scenes where she's with Julius Caesar. One at the beginning where she's in a carriage with him, and she's like always really guarded with her emotions, because when she's living with the Roman nobles, they're not very nice to her. Like she feels isolated. It's mentally wearing for her. She has no friends. And so when she's with Julius, he starts asking her all of these questions, and she's trying not to like let anything out, because she's always just trying to keep everything to herself. And he just like reads her like a book and basically like talks about her whole life. And she's like, how is he doing this? And then later on in the book, she sees him again, and he starts trying to like play his games and unravel her. But she, at this point, now that I think she's like more confident, she has friendships, she's got Spartacus, and she knows that if she says anything, it's like people's lives in danger. And so I loved seeing kind of like that character arc with her too, to see how she had changed and how much she'd grown. And so yeah, everything writing from Alba's point of view for me just came so naturally, like her interactions with everyone, how she saw everything. And I was like, yes, she's the one. Because like if you wrote it from Spartacus, then you wouldn't have like the Julius Caesars. And I mean, maybe you could, but you'd have to like split perspectives or split who you're having it, like who the story's being told from. So she seemed like a good person to have it.
Yeah, and for me, what touched me about it is I've always been partial to the missing perspectives from history. Um, it would be lovely if we had more of these slave perspectives, women's perspectives, foreigners' perspectives than we do. And so it's always a great opportunity to fill in the blanks of Well, there must have been women involved. Who could they have been? Well, there must have been more people from different perspectives involved. Who were they? So I love that you zeroed in on a female perspective, and one that could traverse these boundaries between Roman and foreigner, between slave and free, in such a way.
Yeah.
So
And that's also
yeah,
why I
please.
wanted her to have the different relationships like with the other females in the camp as well, because I feel like sometimes in books there's like a lot of animosity between females or like jealousy, but I want her to have like this, like show like the bond between the females and like certain characters. Like we have gay characters and characters from all different parts of the world. I just wanted to bring them all together. And yeah, as you said, kind of like show their parts in history.
So that kind of brings me around to another question of mine, which is like, what type of research were you doing for this, so that you could make the characters that we don't have details for feel like they were part of the world?
Yeah, well, okay, so I had a base knowledge of Spartacus and Julius Caesar and the Romans just in general. I remember back in grade 7 we did a unit on them, and then you could pick like something that you wanted to do your project on, and I did the gods. I just loved the gods, and I think we also did like a PG version of it, because later on you find out lots of other fun stories about them. So yeah, so I loved that, and I remember Spartacus was just like always a person that stuck with me. And then watching the show, as I said, Spartacus, I think there's like 4 seasons. I only watched a couple, but I really liked how they brought in the people from different nationalities and different backgrounds, and like there's a couple of gay characters and they have such a beautiful relationship. And I wanted to bring all that into it. And so when I was researching, I think I went to the library and I got there's like some great documentaries on the History Channel about the Third Servile War, Spartacus, Julius Caesar, Crassus. So I just started watching them and writing things down and because there is so much information. And it can be, so even like the Third Servile War, there are parts of it that I didn't write about that I could have, that were super interesting, but it's just like you can't cover everything. And so I had to cut a few things here and there. But yeah, I found those documentaries to be really informative. And then also I had, because I took it in university, I took ancient Greece and ancient Roman studies. And so I had a couple textbooks. And so I used those just like for reference to like look at the layouts of the villas and the temples and stuff, because that really helped me to picture like their surroundings, where they were. Like even though I don't write it all, if I can picture it, then I can kind of like create the worlds where they are. And then also I would say Wikipedia is amazing. Like it's not all 100% accurate, but when you look someone up, you can like click and keep like discovering other people or other events, or read more about different items at the time. And so when I started to write, I think I used all of those things. Like I used the show for inspiration. I used the textbooks to kind of get a feel for like what their worlds were like at the time. And also, I remember when I took the class about ancient Rome and ancient Greece in university. I don't know what, because I had done the grade 7 unit. I thought, oh, Spartacus and Julius Caesar, like we'll be talking all about them. But they were like just a snippet. There's like a huge amount of material. And I remember, so yeah, I just found it so fascinating, all the things that you can learn about. And so I just cross-referenced all the different like the Wikipedia, the textbook, the everything, and then that's kind of how I started writing the story and filling in the gaps and filling in characters and kind of creating the world.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but from
Yeah.
reading the book, I got the sense that you were really drawn to the feeling of the world more than like the like being 100% like, oh, this item was in this place, like the very scholarly approach.
Yeah,
Um, so
definitely.
this is definitely a very historical fiction take, not a scholarly fiction take. And I
Oh,
think we
definitely.
need more of those.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say for sure, because I think like as I was writing it too, I kind of pictured it like a movie. So some things are a bit more dramatic and some things are a bit more, yeah. So I would, and also I think just like from an interest point of view, like for me, I want to get into it by like having the stories and having the characters to get invested into, and sometimes you have to have some creative liberties with that. So yeah, yeah, that's definitely accurate.
Can I just ask, this wasn't something that we talked about before, but something that I'm very curious about. Where did the sort of barbarian culture come from for you? Like, was that researched? Was that something that you had read about somewhere else?
Oh, is it like when
Like when she's living in Thrace?
yeah, and they're kind of like referring to the people like the Romans, the people who they think are below them. They call them the barbarians and stuff. And
Uh-huh.
like when Alba's captured by, or when she's with Licinius, then they called them the. I think that might have been in the show Spartacus that they called them that, and it just kind of stuck with me because it was like the nobles thought they were so high up and so amazing, and then they just like wanted to call everyone below them by these different names that weren't as wasn't as nice. So yeah, that must have just been a name that stuck.
Yeah. I thought it was a really effective portrayal of, the cultures outside of Rome being perfectly full and reasonable cultures that just didn't
Yeah.
make that impression on Rome because Rome.
Well, and also there's a scene, I don't know if you remember, where Gannicus, when he gets his wooden sword for freedom, and then later on he has like a whole interaction with Marcus Crassus, or with like Licinius, and then he like basically breaks Hadrian and Alba out of that camp. And like Licinius doesn't even recognize him, even though he gave him the sword. Like I feel like it's like one of those things where he doesn't even think of him as like a human, it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, it's very telling of how people can get when they think that they are in a different class than
Yeah, it's so
others.
hierarchical with, yeah, for sure.
Mhm. And I think you showed how that was a more universal thing too, with how a lot of the rebels initially treat Alba, how she is Roman and therefore other.
Yeah, well, because she represents like everything that they hate, right? Like everything that's always like oppressed them and kept them under, and because most of them have lived their entire lives having to be slaves and like being forced to come from their home countries to work for the Romans. So yeah, definitely.
Um, so I wanted to come back to something you said when you were talking about how you did research. I really want to talk about Wikipedia. So this is one of those things. Like, don't be shy. I love this. This is
Yeah.
great. So Um, when I was teaching, I had to tell everybody, like, don't use Wikipedia as a source when you're writing an academic paper. But that doesn't mean you should never use it as a source for other things. And I love that you used Wikipedia for sort of exploring what was out there.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the interplay between the public facing records that we have versus like your textbook knowledge?
Yeah, well, I remember when I was in university, Wikipedia was like always frowned upon. It was like you cannot use it. And I remember one of my profs pulled up an example where he had like inserted some totally random non-fact into this article, and he's like, "See, anyone can add anything." And but then in like second or third year, it became legit. They were like, "You guys can use it as a source." And so that's when, yeah, people started using it. And I think it has such a breadth of knowledge, but at the same time, it is great to look at textbooks and look at different documentaries that are like they've been fact checked and everything. But at the same time, it's like I feel like we're always like not always, but we discover new things about history all the time. Like they might find an artifact that proves this, or they might find this, and so like I feel like even if you have a textbook, that it could change like some information in it, like the next year. Whereas when you Google things online, you can like find articles that are more up to date. You can find things that are like we know it now. So I think it's good to kind of like balance the two, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was driving at too, because as a scholar, what I've found is, of course, you cannot trust Wikipedia with the details,
Yeah.
because anybody can add anything, and sometimes there are even concerted campaigns for one reason or another to change history. Um,
Oh yeah.
which does not make textbooks immune from that. It's just harder.
Yeah.
but but I love the fact that, if you need just a refresher of, wait, who was that guy again? You can just Google it, and there it is.
Exactly, or see what year he lived or died. Like, I remember when I first started writing the book, and I was like, "Oh, and Spartacus will fight at the Colosseum." And then I Googled the Colosseum, and that was made like 10 years after he died or died, we don't know. So I was like, "Oh," so you can find things like really quick like that, which I loved.
Um, so what are your writing plans going forward? Are you going to keep exploring this time period? Do you have other ambitions?
Okay, so I'm actually writing a book that's set more like contemporary, like 2010 to 2018. But I could definitely see myself going back to this time period because, as I said, I find it fascinating. Or I could also see myself writing about like the gods because I find that they're also really interesting and so many cool dynamics and stuff there. So I wouldn't rule it out, but currently I do not have something planned to write in this time period.
Well, actually, you just brought up something else really interesting. You were talking about how fascinating you find the gods,
Yeah.
but in Alba there are no gods, no
No, but
supernatural appearances.
she does pray, and she's
She does
praying to the
pray.
gods. Yeah, and she kinda, like, has but then Spartacus is, like, our equivalent to an atheist because he's like, "You're praying to these inanimate objects," and she's like, "Well, this is what brings me comfort." So, yeah, I that is kind of interesting to think actually, 'cause I've definitely always been fascinated by them.
Yeah. So why did you decide to keep the world of Alba so grounded? Because
Um
because you didn't have to make Alba a world where the gods didn't interfere, and yet they don't.
Oh, gosh, I
So that's
yeah,
just something I'm curious about. Because I mean, this is a genuine, like, this is something that a lot of
that's
writers
interesting, yeah,
in
because,
time
like
periods like this struggle with.
yeah, because you have a book like, say, for example, like Song of Achilles, I don't know if you've read that, fabulous book,
No,
where
but I've
there's
heard
well, I
about it.
guess that's not really based on it's like the Iliad and,
Yeah.
the Odyssey and stuff, but there yeah, there's, like, parts of it that are based in kinda, like, real life stuff, and then parts where she brings in there's, like, lots of really neat stuff with the gods, but for me, I don't know, I always just thought I wanted to tell the history as close as I could to well, not as close as I could, but, like, with my own creative, input, but I didn't wanna have any, like, then Apollo came in and shot his arrow and took out like, I wanted to keep it, free of any of that. Yeah. I never even actually, I don't think I thought about even adding it.
That's very interesting because, yeah, I mean, when we study this, when we study other time periods, especially when we're studying things more like the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's very easy to be like, oh, yes, these are these fascinating supernatural influences that I could play
Yeah.
with. I'm already making this, this is a work of fiction. I don't need to stick very closely. But in working as sort of a historical fiction author, it's always interesting to see who decides to make that line where. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that groundedness that you have.
Yeah, I feel like if you were to write a book about the gods or that sort of like, you'd have to be really knowledgeable about it, really passionate about it. So I'd have to, like, really get back into that, and it would probably take, like, maybe even a couple of years just to reestablish myself in that.
So, um, in regards to that, there is a portion of the book where Alba decides that she's going to go and be a servant of a goddess
Oh,
and
yeah.
dedicate her life to this.
Yeah.
So in your characterization of Alba as a person, was there any real religious feeling to that?
Well, I think so first of all, the reason she was even thinking about doing that was because she wanted to get away from her aunt and uncle who were not nice to her, and she also didn't want her aunt, who was, like, a bit whacked, to place her in a marriage with someone who could have been very, cruel to Elba, so she was trying to, like and also, she was proposed to by another person, but she didn't wanna well, kind of, like, she was asked to join their house, but she didn't wanna join them because their involvement with the slaves. So she, as I was saying earlier, she had like her own moral compass, and she thought that living in the temple was a life she could live in and with. But I'm not sure, like, even if she was there, I'm not sure how religious she would have been. I think it would have been more like a, okay, I'm out of that other situation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think that that has a lot of grounding in reality too. Throughout history, when otherwise powerless women have no choice but to be forced into an untenable situation,
Yeah, it's
they
like the
will
lesser of
often
two evils.
they will often plead religion to get out of it. And I don't think that that's an accident. I don't think that,
Mhm.
this other controlled environment for women to be in, I don't think that's an accident. That that's the only other option sometimes.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question that dives more into your writing process, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, and before I do, we have hit the halfway mark of our interview, so I do want to open this up. If anybody in the audience has questions, please send them in. If you write them in chat, we will see them. So, just a reminder: your questions are welcome. But for the time being, I certainly have more. Um, so the way I've heard you talk about these characters, it's kind of like they were living in your head and
Oh,
you
yeah.
were allowing them to explore the world that you'd built. So do you find yourself to be more of a character and exploratory writer, or do you like to like lay out the plot, or how do you approach this?
Yeah, so, gosh. So I think what I did was I had the framework. I knew for sure we were gonna have an Alba. I knew we were gonna have a Spartacus. And then I started to build characters around them. And they kind of each had their own ensemble cast. Like Alba in the Roman world, there's like the people there, her relatives, Julius, Marcus Crassus, all of them. And then with Spartacus, there was that cast. And so I think that the people came out most clearly to me through their interactions with each other, and like especially some of the headbutting that happened, like between Alba and Hadrian and Alba and Natalie at the beginning, and then also like Alba trying to help and save Chloe. So it I think it was mainly like relationship driven for me, and then also kind of fitting it in around, okay, these are the events I want to like talk about, these are the events I want to cover. And then it was kind of like, okay, these are like trying to like, these are the things for sure, and then building the bridges between them all.
So that's sort of a like a loose skeleton of a plot, and then the characters
Yeah,
get you from one place to the other.
exactly. And also like when I write, I don't write in order. Like even if the book's told linearly, I just write like whatever I'm, oh, this person's gonna have this conversation, this person's gonna have that. So when I wrote the book, and then all of a sudden I had to like put it all in order. So it was, yeah, it was an interesting process.
So you mentioned earlier that there were a number of events that you had the opportunity to write about and couldn't fit them in. Is there anything that you feel
Yeah.
like you would have liked to go back and add
Well, there I
if it
wouldn't
wouldn't have
actually have
distracted
added
from the
it, but
story?
yeah, one I did have that I did cut was there's a during the whole like slave situation, there's one winter where the Romans build a huge trench and they're trying to like block the rebels in. And the rebels, it's kind of gross, but they use the Roman bodies and they like build a bridge to like get across it. And that was their way to like stick it to the Romans and be like, yeah, we figured this one out. So that was something I was going to write, but then I was like, it's kind of gruesome, and there's already a lot of gruesome stuff. And then it was also just there's so many big events. It's like you had to cut some things.
So I mean, I'm hearing you talk about like kind of modifying for tone in terms of how gruesome you want to be. Were there
Yeah.
any sort of other criteria in your head that helped you to pick and choose which events to talk about?
Well, it was it was kind of more of like, okay, how do I want to shape this whole story? How do I want to show, like, I wanted to, as I said, have Spartacus's life from when he was a boy to the end. And so there were certain things that I knew for sure I wanted to have. And so some things just came to me very naturally. I was like, I need to have them. And other things, they were a bit forced. I was like, okay, I have to get from here to here and there to there. And so yeah, I kind of just like wrote them in. And then also there was some scenes where they are kind of like intense, but some people kind of pick up on this and some people not so much. But like Hadrian's character, for example, I was hoping he'd provide a little bit of like comedic relief here and there. So sometimes he would make comments about certain situations, to try and like hopefully like lighten the mood a bit, but it would be like a really dark situation.
Yeah, gallows humor, I think, is kind of inevitable in a situation like that.
Yeah.
So the funniest thing that I recall, uh, like that just stuck out to me was I can't remember if it was Hadrian who said it or if it was about Hadrian now. Um, but somebody asked somebody else like, "What first drew you to this romantic partner of yours?"
Yeah, yeah. It was like little things like that. I was just trying to alleviate the intensity at some points.
Yeah, so I like that you have these very natural human conversations interspersed in these very dire situations.
Yeah.
Um, and points where there are just sudden killings because people don't see other people as human.
And
Or
also with
mhm.
like with the ensemble cast when Elba's with the rebels, it's kind of tricky because at one point there's like 8 or 10 kind of like big characters, and so I wanted the reader to be able to like picture them when they're all together. Like I'm like, would so and so actually be talking to so and so? Like what would they even be talking about? So I'm like trying to create like, I wanted them to be able to picture if they're like all sitting around having dinner together, like who's with who, who's interacting with who. So yeah, that was also kind of a way to try and bring a lightness, was to bring this sense of like camaraderie and familial, like their togetherness. And like also I don't know if you remember the scene where like Diana is kind of intense and wants to keep Max with her,
Mhm.
and even though Natalie is like kind of pissed off with Alba, she's like, Natalie, or she's like, Diana, give Alba back her son. And I want to show like that they have Elba's back even when they're annoyed, and just create that like that bond that they have.
Yeah, so that's another interesting theme that you play with is motherhood in this world. So there are a lot of torn apart families for
Mhm.
various reasons. Um, where did that come from for you? Like where was the heart of that for you?
Um, yeah, because like Elba's mom kills herself, sadly, and then her own like mother figure, her aunt, is doesn't want to be her like in her life. And then when, so I think that's why when Elba has her daughter or her son, that's why she doesn't feel like as much of a connection with him at first, and that's why she like finds it easier to leave him when she goes back to like Licinius's camp and stuff. And then Chloe takes on motherhood so naturally. And yeah, I thought it was interesting kind of exploring like the different, how some people it comes so naturally to, and like even like Chloe's body welcomed it. Like she just was like, when she was pregnant, she was like floating around, whereas Elba was like, whoa, like so overwhelmed with her pregnancy. And yeah, so I just thought, and then also too, it was kind of cool because they were pregnant at the same time, so I could show their different reactions to it. And then also I think this book is a lot about found families, because a lot of them have been taken away from their homes, and they like, or their parents, they've never known them, or their siblings are dead, like Spartacus, like his, things that happened with his mom and brother. And so yeah, there's just so many different things going on there. And yeah.
Yeah, and I did kind of wonder about the character of Diana. She is sort of an outlier. We have these very very Roman women at the beginning with you know, very like fitting into the mold that Roman men prescribe for them kind of women, where they're conniving and they're uncaring and they're a bit sex driven. Um, and then we break out of that, and I mean we already know that that's not all Roman women. Like that's just, the people who are trying the hardest to be Roman women. Um, when we break out of that and we have Natalie, who's such a force of nature. We have Alba herself, who's like trying to come into herself. we have that figure of Spartacus's mother in the background, who was, you know, being completely different from Natalie, also a force of nature. And then we have Chloe, who is sort of like this gentle, flowery, traditionally femme person.
Yeah.
Um, we have all of these just absolutely bad to the bone women. They're so good. They're so forceful. They have such personality. And then we get Diana, whose character is a bit hidden and whose motivations are kind of inscrutable at various points.
Yeah.
So like where did Diana come from?
So when I first started writing her, she was gonna be a good character. I was like, she's gonna be lovely. She's gonna blend with Elba. They're gonna have the best times. And then all of a sudden, she like turned, and I was like, oh no, she goes dark. And so as I was writing her out, I realized that she's actually because she's someone who's been her whole life mistreated, having to play the games, and so I have her. You kind of don't really get a beat on her at the beginning, but because like when you very first meet her, she has like a sweet melodic voice, and she's like trying to get Elba to take a bath. So you can tell that she's been in this world for a long time. She knows how to play the game, and she also knows that Elba's going to be going to the temple, and so I think that's why she does. Like I don't remember the scene where she stitches her up, but it's not the best job. And so yeah, I think the thing about Diana, she was a hard character to write because it's like she has all this anger and intensity and like, but also wants to have a kid. So then she like steals a child and does all these things. But then you do kind of feel for her because she has been under other people's thumbs for so long. But then at the same time, you have someone like a Natalie who had the same thing happen, and she became such a like a well, like a loving character and so great to all the people around her. So you can see how it kind of changes for different people and how they're treated and how they're affected. But yeah, she was definitely an interesting character because she all the other characters I knew right from the get-go, this is how they're going to be, and she just like switched on me. I was like, oh, she goes bad.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I almost want like a little short story of like Diana's perspective because it's got to be so fascinating and probably very heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to see that depth come out of characters who at first you think are side characters and then they turn out to be so much more.
Yeah. Well, and also like when I was writing them, like all of the characters to me, even like some of the really peripheral ones, like I could picture them like totally. So when I was writing their dialogue or how they looked or whatever, like it just came out. Like I knew. I was like, this is how they're going to be, except for Diana. I just never knew.
Um, so I do want to just turn to our audience again, remind you that we do have, about 10 more minutes for questions. If you do have anything you want to talk about, please send them in. Otherwise, I'll just keep on. um, so when you were sort of deciding about where the story was going to sort of wrap up,
Hmm.
how did you imagine that sort of motherhood narrative winding into it? Did that just happen or was that a plan?
Do you mean like with the Diana bit or with like Elba later on and who she reconnects with?
Both. Both. Like just in general, like there's so much to do with children and who
Yeah.
their parents are and who their
Yeah.
parents aren't. And
Yes. Well, when the book was wrapping up, it was tricky for me because I was like, okay, who's gonna live? Who's gonna die? How are they gonna die? What's gonna happen? And I also felt like I really wanted Elba to reconnect with her son. Like I felt it was just so heartbreaking when he was gone. So I was like, we're gonna find a way to get them back together again. And then with Chloe, when she spoiler when she dies, I was like, um, oh crap, like what's going to happen to her daughter? And I didn't want it to be like a just an open-ended like she goes missing, so that. And also earlier in the book, Hadrian mentions that he would like to have a child, and so like that he would like to have, because he's gay, and he said that he would like to have the opportunity to like have that decision. And so I love how later on, when they come across Chloe's child, that he can kind of take her in and like adopt her as his own. And then also with Diana, I was really glad when certain things happen at the end, and there something happens to her. I won't say. And then Spartacus and Alba are reunited with their son. I really enjoyed writing that and kind of coming full circle, because like Alba and Spartacus slash Alex, all they ever wanted was to like have a family and to be together and just like have a peaceful life. And so they finally have that with their kids and with their closest friends. So yeah, I loved reading that.
Um, one thing that I really was interested in is I mean, you mentioned the concept of found family, and they really do, they kind of the people that they bond with become, in some ways, siblings, in some ways, partners. Um, like at the end, they practically are an extended polycule.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so like for you, is that a very personal thing, or is that something that you have seen happen, or
Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, it's the type of thing where in your life you have people around you who they might not be family, but you're really close with, and then family members who you are really close with. And then also, like when I was writing about the Romans, you've got all those like dynamics and people in their own world just like vying for their own power and trying to do things their own way. And I definitely have seen that in my life where people are just kind of like looking out for their themselves, you know?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I wanted to create this lovely world where not but like where they were all kind of like had a common goal, and that bonded them together and brought them together. And yeah, I love writing about different relationships and bonds between people. Like that for me was exciting. Like I loved writing how Alba and Hadrian really dislike each other at the beginning, and then by the end they're like the best of friends. That I loved writing that character or that relationship arc.
Yeah, which kind of brings me back around to Julius, because he's such an interesting figure, and you mentioned how savvy he is, how easily he's able to read people. But when I was reading him, I also got a sense of the depths that he was hiding, that there was a lot more to him than
Yeah,
what you were showing. So, like, how are you envisioning him?
as a character. Well,
Yeah.
okay, I don't, do you remember the scene where we meet him?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that was like that was the first scene that came to me with him. I was like, that's how we're meeting Julius. And so I was like, right from the get-go, he's kind of morally like, you don't know, is he good? Is he bad? Is he a creep? Is he this or is he that? And so I wanted that to be like the moment we meet him. And then after that, you have to develop your own ideas about him through his interactions with Elba and different people. And yeah, he's definitely got a bit of an agenda, what's going on, like because he's constantly trying to like work the room, work the people. But I think also, like I was trying to show a bit through his relationship with Elba, that he also has like a kind and human side. Like if he likes you, he's going to look out for you. And that's why later on, when like Kineas is really annoyed with Elba and like wants to send her off with the pirate, he's like, we did our best with you, you didn't work out, like we're sending you away. uh Julius is like, no, like you were one of us, I had a connection with you, I'm gonna let you go. And so yeah, he was a character that was really interesting because there's parts of him that were a bit like sketchy, but then there's other parts where he's very clear about what he thinks. And like when like Kineas proposes to Elba, and Julius says, I'm the one who told him to do that, I'm the one who, like he's very straight up in certain ways, and then in other ways he's more, and I think that's also because like I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but like, so Sulla, who was in power, his family would like take out Julius Caesar's family. When Sulla was in power, they'd take the Caesar family out, and then when Caesar's family was in power, they would like take out Sulla's family. And so I think that they just had to be really careful about how they did things, and who they pledged their allegiance to and stuff. And so yeah, so it's like all these different things that I was thinking about with Julius's character, that he's like kind of charming and outgoing and witty and all these things, but then also kind of guarded.
Yeah. Um, so we are going to start to put up some of these QR codes. So please scan the QR code on screen right now to find Alba on Amazon. Pick up a copy for yourself. Um, So do watch the screen. There will be more coming as we begin to head towards the end of our time today. And if you have any questions, now's the time. Um, so if you were going to return to this time period, do
Yeah.
you have like a second spark of someone you'd want to follow?
Oh.
Not initially, maybe?
It would probably be something to do with, like, something around the time of, like, the Iliad or the Odyssey or something, which would be totally, like, different, like, with the gods and stuff. But that time period has always fascinated me and the different stories there. I could definitely see me getting invested in that and writing about, and as you said, like, there's lots of interesting women characters in, Alba, and I think like looking at the Battle of Troy and all those different things, there's lots of fascinating women characters there as well that you could write about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would love to see something like that. We do have the SASA donation QR code up on screen now. If you would like to help us keep these programs running, please do consider sending either a one-time or a recurring donation to our program. Thank you so much. Um, so, what was your favorite thing that happened while you were writing this book?
Like favorite thing that I wrote?
Yeah, like
Oh gosh. There was uh okay, so there was a scene where I don't know if you remember where Leanna comes into Elba's room and she's basically saying like, I really need you to help me find Pomona a husband. Like, can we do this together? And she like puts her hand on Elba's and she's like, you and I are not friends, but like we could do this. And I don't know why, but I just loved writing that scene because it's like this woman, Leanna's like, she's usually so composed and like put together and confident, and she's like, but she knows that Alba's like capable and that she can help her, and even though she would like never compliment Alba or give her a pat on the back, she's like, we can work together on this. And I loved writing that scene.
yeah, that makes sense to me because it's always nice to have people break out of the stereotype boxes you put them in because they're always going to. We
Yeah, and
do
I love
have
that trying to show
oh,
that
sorry.
she's like sorry, I was trying to show that she's like a human. Like Leanna, like even though she
Mhm.
seems this way, she also wants what's best for her daughter. And so I was trying to show like the other side of her.
Yeah, so we do have a question from the audience. Apocalypse Biao, nice name, says, love the found family motif. Nichelle, how does traveling or looking back in history influence that search for family, whether in the past or present?
Um, how does traveling or looking back in history influence the search for? So, like looking back in history, how's traveling or looking back in history?
Do you think that like changes your own search for family, or do you
Oh,
feel like maybe it do you feel like it's different looking into the past and the situation that Alba was in, which is not at all
yes.
like our
Yes, I
situation?
see
Like
okay, yeah,
there's
for
lots of
sure.
directions you could go with.
Because, like, with Alba, it was like a live or die situation when she's with the rebels, so
Mhm.
I would say definitely back in history, it was different stakes, a different situation, yeah, for sure. So I would say it's different than the present. Well, I mean, these days too, with like different wars going on in different places and different, I feel like in moments of panic or moments of like crisis, like it can really bond people. And so it just depends on the place and what's going on at that time.
Yeah. Oftentimes, found family is found when you have nothing else.
Yeah, or like if there's a moment, like if someone in your family is really ill, and then all of a sudden the neighbors are coming over and like checking in, or if you're at your house and all of a sudden there's like a flood that happens from an upstairs neighbor or something, and all the neighbors are trying to help you, which happened to us yesterday. And
Oh,
so it's like, yeah, not that it's a found family, but it's definitely a found connection. It's a found like relationships and things. So yeah, I think looking back in history, there's lots of different connections and people and things that came about that might not come about these days.
yeah. Um, I think that's a really beautiful note to end on that, like, no matter what the exact circumstances, are, there are always people who want to help. There are always
Yeah.
people you can find a connection with.
And unsuspecting too. Like, sometimes it's people that you don't expect, or you might pass, like, 20 times in a stairwell and not even acknowledge, and all of a sudden they're helping you, and you're like, "Thank you so much." Yeah.
Yeah. In the end, we're all just people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, Unfortunately, it is about time to wrap up. So thank you so much, Nichelle, for being with us today.
Yeah.
What a great interview this has been. Thank you to our audience and for the lovely question. Don't forget to check out the book. Alba is available through Amazon and other bookstores. Nichelle, do you have anything you would like to plug here?
No, I'm, like, just recently on Instagram, and, I'm on Goodreads, and, yeah, my books are on, like, all major retailers that I'm aware of, and the ebook as well, like Kobo, Amazon, yeah, Barnes& and Noble, everywhere. So, yeah, exciting, and thank you so much for having me, I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. And thanks to all our audience members for watching along and participating and clicking on those links. Um, we'd love to see you again next time. And Nichelle, we'll be looking forward to your next book.
Oh,
Uh,
thanks.
this has been a SASA book club with Nichelle Kovacheff for her book Alba. And if you would like to purchase that book, there's still a QR code on screen. If you would like to donate to SASA so we can keep having those events, there's our QR code for that. Or you can look us up at saveancientstudies.org. Have a wonderful day, everybody.